Can we do roll call, please?
Mayor Pro Tem Scholl,
Here.
Councilman Blair,
Yes.
Councilman Good,
Here.
Councilmember Rusing.
She's recusing herself.
Okay, she will be recused from the entire meeting.
Yes.
Councilman Sishka,
Here.
and let the record reflect that Mayor Mangrelli and Councilman Tenney are excused.
All right. Item 3A, please.
Update on the Granite Creek Corridor Master Plan implementation.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. I guess who's left of Council here. I wanted to bring this today. We have a lot of progress going on with the Granite Creek Corridor. This is separate from the area plans, as you know. This is the master plan we've been working on for 3 years, and we're at the point where bids for construction, we have that out, and they're due this Thursday. So in preparation for that, we will be bringing back the results and a recommendation to the council either on the 26th or on November 9th, depending on how fast we can work. But we wanted to get some items and some knowledge before all of that happens. Just as an update, after the engineering and design was done, the estimated cost for construction is just under $1.7 million. It's $1,695,000. The bids could come in, of course, at a different amount. So we'll see what those end up being Thursday afternoon. I wanted to jump back a little ways to give you a refresher on what we've done to try to secure grant funding and the sources we've tried to tap into. In order to get the master plan done, we worked with the Arizona Water Protection Fund, and they funded the whole thing. So that was great. As part of that process, we identified that same fund could be used for the in-creek improvements of the master plan. So we initially budgeted, estimated, and thought, okay, we're going to probably get at least half of those costs covered by that grant. Then COVID came, the funding dried up, and we've had this conversation in previous study sessions, but they did have some other funding from the state given to them, and I looked into it and attended one of their informational sessions, but that funding is only for areas that aren't in active management areas. So we wouldn't be eligible at this point. That could change in the future, but it's not a viable source of funding at this stage. So with that, we turned our focus to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is state managed, but it's federal dollars. We submitted an application for $500,000. It received state approval and went through very smoothly through that process, but then was sent to the National Park Service for a final review and thumbs up. National Park Service, they initially explained that we didn't show enough control over the land between Aubrey and Goodwin Street, basically the school district and private property. And so we then sent our easement documents that we've had for many years in place showing permanent trail easements in those locations and asked for them to clarify why this wasn't sufficient. It took months of us prodding and poking and trying to get an answer to or from them. We eventually enlisted the help of Senator Sinema's office, and with a quick phone call, they got an answer that despite us having permanent public easements, it just wasn't enough. They needed more specific language, very specific, from National Park Service. So with that information in hand, we beefed up those easements, and we just recently sent those back to them for their approval. Now, they haven't been signed by the school district or the private property owner, but if we get approval from National Park Service, we'll go and do that process. The sticking point here is they initially told Senator Sinema's office, well, it's too late in this grant cycle to get the $500,000. But with us sending these easements back, we're pushing them through Sinema's office. We want the $500,000 now. We've done everything. We have state approval. We've been trying to communicate with you for several months and didn't hear back. And that is still, as we speak, up in the air. I'm hoping to get an answer on that by the time that we select a bid for construction and bring it back to the council so we can have a clearer picture. A couple other moving pieces to this project. We were notified that a trust had bequeathed to the city a large sum of money, about $500,000 total. And with that, we requested that it be used for this project and received approval at least for most of it. And we've gone back to request the remaining amount, and we expect that it will be approved. So with that, that's great news. That's $500,000 that we didn't think we had a year ago at this time. So what does it come down to with city funding? Initially, we thought that the city would be responsible for 50% of the overall project costs. After the Water Protection Fund money dried up, the council approved us to spend out of general fund $1,020,000. That's what we've talked about in the past. Depending on the Land and Water Conservation Fund money, the $500,000 coming or not, the city could be responsible from anywhere between $695,000 to just under $1.2 million for this project. So I wanted to bring these items to you to give you a heads up that there's some moving pieces with grant dollars, what we've done in the past, what we're trying to do now, and we will be back before you in just a couple weeks with a bid proposal for your approval for the project. Now, there's a couple options. We could, depending on the outcome of this grant funding, if it's a positive outcome, we could move forward and we're actually spending less money out of the general fund than we ever thought we would for this project. If we don't get that grant funding, we're spending a couple $100,000 more than we initially thought because that trust money came in and is helping. If we want to wait for another grant cycle, it's probably another year to start the project. So with those updates, I'd love to hear your feedback and input.
Thank you, Tyler. Any questions or comments from council? Councilman Triska.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Tyler, are you saying on the ownership thing that they want us to own the creek bed?
Ideally, they would, but we found in their own rule book, you don't have to own it. You need permanent easements, which we had, but it didn't contain language, very specific language that they wanted. So now we're trying to fix that and get those approved.
So do you feel that overall the concept of what we're presenting to them is palatable to them? It's just a language thing?
Exactly. The project is great, and it received state approval, no questions asked. When it was kicked up to the National Park Service, they looked at all the details and said, your access and your control over the land in that one block from Aubrey to Goodwin isn't sufficient enough.
Okay, and if we paid for this out of general fund, could we in arrears get reimbursed by the government for what we're putting the grant in for?
And that is a question that we are asking National Park Service. They do have in their rules some provisions to be given the money after the work is done or maybe in the middle of the work. And at this stage, we're going to have to receive that approval anyways if we decide to start the work, because the grant's not going to be in the bank here in the next month when we want to start construction.
So if we don't get that grant and we have the 500, we'd be at 1.2 million to fund what we expect to be 1.7. Excuse me. We're not even sure it would be 1.7. That's our estimate. And when we go out to bid, it could be higher, could be lower, could be the same, right?
Correct. It could be higher or lower, and we're going to know that Thursday afternoon when bids close and we have results
This week.
this week.
I think we just need to wait and see what those bids are.
That makes a difference because otherwise 500,000 to come out of general fund is a lot of money.
It could very well be, 200,000 or 300,000 less than we think. I mean, this is kind of a strange and unique project, so I think we need to wait and see.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like we did follow what the National Park Service indicated was necessary, but they just decided to ignore it or delay it. I thought it was pretty remarkable that Senator Sinna's office could get us an answer within 2 days when they pick up the phone. But that was just to find out what the glitch was.
Mm-hmm.
So I would find it probably not too probable that they would be more cooperative in the next grant cycle than they are in this one.
The only change being that we would actually have their language that they sent, and I worked with Matt on this, and we literally took the language, the bullet points they wanted to include in an easement, and we put those into our standard trail easement. We're also expanding the width of the easement so it covers the entire corridor, which helps make a difference. But with that change, we would be much more likely to see a green light quickly in the next grant cycle. But that cycle's starting 8 months from now, about, I believe.
So it would conclude about the same time next year at this time to find out if we actually were awarded that, and we could start award the bid, start construction, and then with the hope that that was awarded, and then we would get funding kind of on the back end of it.
That is correct. We could, if the council decided to wait, we would put in another grant application to receive the state approval, the federal approval. And that process, if I remember correctly, would start beginning of next summer or late spring, and then you get approval several months later. So we'd start construction about a year from now.
And we're not asking for any state funding. It's just an approval process.
It's federal dollars passed through a state fund. So that's the chain. You have to get state and then federal approval.
So we still have to apply to that state fund, and there would be other applicants applying to that fund next year as well, right?
Correct. It is competitive, but to be honest, they typically have money left over. They don't get enough projects to expend all of it every year. At least in the past, that's the way it's been.
Maybe we should ask for more from the state fund then. Can't figure out where to send it.
If we wait a year, are we going to need to rebid the project, though?
We would rebid at that point, and who knows with costs
Could be more,
what it
or
would
could be
be.
less. Blair?
Mayor Pro Tem, I think, there's a couple of moving parts that I'm hearing. I heard from you that said if we get feedback from the State Park Service that they haven't closed the door on this grant cycle. So I think it would behoove us to put the pressure on Cinema's office to get it approved during this grant cycle that we're in, and get either a yes or no affirmative. We don't have that right now, nor do we have a construction cost. I think we need to wait for both of those before we make a decision on whether to push it back to the next grant cycle.
And by the time I bring this to the council, the earliest will be October 26th, and that might be pushing it because we close the day before council members are due. So it's more likely November 9th we'll be coming back with a recommendation on a bidder. You'll know the cost. By then, I hope I have an answer from the Park Service on whether or not they will give us the $500,000 this cycle. I just wanted to get this before you so there's no blindsiding when we come to that point.
Do you know how many bids we have submitted yet?
I do not. We won't know until we
You
open.
open the bids. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, that sounds reasonable to me. Can't really move forward until we have a little more clarity.
Yeah.
Jennifer, any public comment?
No.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it for me.
That was easy. All right. With that, this meeting is adjourned. We'll see you at 3.